Descartes has this principle about ideas, though it's one you might disagree with quite plausibly, I think. He wants to suggest that ideas need to come from, they need to be caused by something at least as real as the idea themselves. Now, at first glance, it's not at all clear what this means. I think an analogy with taking pictures makes this easier. So if you take a picture, it can't be clearer than a real thing, right? So if you take a picture of something that's way off in the distance, it's not going to be any clearer, any less blurry, any easier to see, right? Assuming you're not using a special zoom lens or anything like that, right? It can't be clearer, brighter, better than the real thing, right? The best it can be is exactly like it. Descartes' going to say about the same thing about ideas, right? So an idea can't be more real than whatever it comes from, because ideas are in his mind like pictures. It can be at best as real, which means that whatever caused it must be equally or more real, clear, good, whatever you want to say, than the idea. So when he talks about the fire, he thinks, well, the fire is more real than the idea, just the feeling of heat in me. The fire is at least as real and probably more real, because it actually exists. The same, he's going to say, goes for all causes and effects. All effects need to be at least as real as their causes. And this seems fair. It's not entirely clear yet why he's saying this, right? But if you think about pool balls, right? An imaginary pool ball couldn't push a real one around the table. Duh. Right? This is fairly uncontroversial, I think. Though the way he applies it, you might take issue with. And again, something to discuss on the discussion boards this week. So Descartes thinks this: if he can find an idea in his mind that's too real for it to come from him, so an idea that's more real than Descartes himself, he can prove that something else must be the source. I'll run through this again. So we know that ideas need to be at most as real as whatever caused them. So the causes need to be more real. Well, if Descartes is less real than some idea that he has, whatever that means, then the cause of that idea must have been something else. So if you can find an idea in his mind that has more reality in it, more clarity, more power, whatever you want to say, than Descartes himself, it must have come from something other than him. So now he can prove he's not alone in the universe. He's going to consider a couple of candidates. Corporeal things, bodily, physical things. No, he could be the source of those pretty easily. He runs through those pretty quickly. He thinks then about something like angels, and he says, well, yeah, these are better than me, but I could figure out, just from sort of my attributes and thinking, what if I took, how good I am and then made it just a lot better? That'd be like an angel. He could still have thought of that. But Descartes' going to say he couldn't have thought up the idea of God, and he's going to run through all the reasons why this is the case now. So Descartes' idea of God has a whole bunch of attributes. It's the sort of archetypal Catholic God. And so what it boils down to, you've got the whole list here, but it boils down to several perfect things. He's perfectly powerful, perfectly intelligent, and sort of all-knowing, and he's perfectly good. And Descartes thinks he couldn't possibly have made up all of those traits only by looking internally to himself. He thinks he needs to have had some other source for this idea, and if that's the case, there must be something else out there in the world, and that thing is probably God. He's going to consider a few objections now and show why he couldn't have made up that idea all by himself. So the first way it might have happened, he suggests, is he could have looked at himself as a finite thing, a bounded, limited thing, and he could just negate that. He could say, well, I know I'm finite, and so if I want to take not finite, then I get infinite. Now I get God, because God is infinitely good, infinitely smart, infinitely everything. He thinks, though, that gets it backwards, because we have an idea of the finite only because we know what infinity would be like, he thinks. That's not really the way to say it, because he thinks we can't entirely grasp infinity, but he thinks we only have an idea of the finite because it's not infinite. And so infinity, he's going to say, has more reality than finiteness. So we get the idea of finite from the infinite. So it can't be that he invented he invented the infinite by knowing that he's finite. This one's a little hard to follow, but it doesn't matter all that much. There's another way he could have done it. He could have looked at himself and said, well, like he did with the angels, right? He's got a whole bunch of traits, and he could just make those really fantastically good. He says, well, I can't have done this either, because God has no potential, right? So he looks at himself and he says, well, I've got potential intelligence, potential goodness, potential powerfulness, and God just has all of those actualized. Well, there's two problems here. If you take all those potentials and make them bigger, well, he's going to say God doesn't have potential, God is everything actual. And further, Descartes could never actually be perfect, because he's not. And so it can't have got him all the way. We'll see a few more of these in the next video.